Warp Core Breach, Episode 64. The Wizard Behind the Curtain.
Welcome to this special edition of Warp Core Breach, where we're here to interview Robert George, our resident Spacedock coder. Welcome, Robert.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. How long has it been since you first took over for Spacedock?
I think like a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I know that he, the original developer, Rob, he said that he was going out of the game and was looking for someone to take over, and I was already helping with some stuff, so I just offered to take over.
Mm-hmm. Oh, certainly appreciated having you field the ball on this one. Now, do you still play Star Trek Attack Wing?
No, not really, but it's more of just a time issue.
Mm-hmm.
The local game store where they play, it's like 45 minutes away, and I have kids, so my free time doesn't really allow me to leave for most of the day.
Yeah, real life does tend to get in the way sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, if anything, that just says more for your dedication to the cause, helping out, keeping this app going, even though you're not able to participate as much as you'd like to.
Yeah. It has sort of kept me from really knowing some of the controversies with some of the strange rulings, or any weird interactions. I sort of have to go with my gut on how some of these cards are supposed to work.
True. And that's also part of our relationship, isn't it, Robert?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I rely on you as one of my primary testers to help me know that the apps are following the certain restrictions for new cards correctly, and if there's been any kind of ruling
or
that
an errata.
Or an errata that has changed the way things interact that I need to change.
Mm-hmm. Can you sort of walk us through the history of the Spacedock development from what you know of what you took over and from what you've done since you took over?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how the original developer came about it. I found some old posts on the Board Game Geek site where he was doing the initial beta testing for it. But he created the app before I had even known that the game existed.
Right.
And so I don't know much about the history of how he got started with it. I contacted him because there was something that I thought it should have. I have no recollection of what that was. And he said, "Oh, well, just add it yourself." And so I did. And then I did some other helping around with some other stuff, and then he lost interest in the game and looked for someone to take it over, so I took it over. And from that point on, I've sort of used my own use of the app to sort of determine any kind of new features to add to it. One of the biggest features that I added was the in-app update to allow the data to be updated without requiring a full app update, which has longer delays, because with the iPhone app it requires waiting for Apple to approve the update, and with the Android app I don't actually have access to load it into the store. There's another guy that was doing the Android updates. He's no longer doing the updates, but I sort of tell him when it's ready to be pushed to the store, and he pushes it out.
Excellent. So there's still a bit of a team effort going on here. A dependency. Well, for those that aren't aware, can you explain the difference between the data update and the app update?
So when a new card comes out, there's two things I have to do. One, I have to put all of the information for the card into the app so that it shows up. There's another person on the Board Game Geek site that does most of the data entry for that. That allows me to load the data pretty quickly, as long as I have time to actually sit down and parse through it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to look at it and determine if it has any special attributes to it. This card can only be on a Klingon ship, or this card adds a text slot, or some of the more difficult cards that they come out with are the ones that are question marks that can be multiple slots. As you may have noticed, I typically just sort of make a copy of that card in all of the slots that it can match.
Right.
So when there's a data update, that's when you get the card into the app. That's when I've managed to go through and look at the card, make sure all the information is there, that it's set up right, the cost is right, and all that stuff. And here's where it gets tricky, is if the card has attributes that already exist, a good example is like a faction restriction. If the card only works on a Klingon or a Federation ship, those usually already exist. So I can set that card up to use that existing restriction and it'll work.
Right. So the functionality is already built into the app, so you don't need to change any of that.
Yeah. But when there's a new card that does something weird, and nowadays it's usually really weird.
Yeah.
I have to look at it and go, all right, what does this do and how can this work? A lot of times those cards won't work right. They'll just act like any other card, and you can add it to whatever, and it doesn't follow any of the special restrictions. It doesn't add the additional costs or any kind of penalties that it should have or any bonuses that it should create. It's just there. And then it's up to you to use options like the notes or the additional cost for the squad to put in the changes to make that sort of add up the way it needs to be. And that's a limitation that will always be there, and there's no way around it.
Right.
So some of the relatively easy ones I can do, it's some minor programming changes. I do them, and then with the next app update, the full app update that you get from the Play Store or the App Store, that usually will just make it work, and it'll just start working. Sometimes, just because of the way things are loaded, you might have to remove the card from its being on a certain ship and put it back on for it to do all the things that it needs to do if it does a whole bunch of things.
Right, the old, have you tried turning it off and on again routine?
A lot of times it'll just work, because the apps, they sort of load everything repeatedly in various times. So a lot of times just updating the app will make things sort of add up and function the way they need to be. And illegal cards will automatically get removed if they've become illegal. Sometimes it doesn't.
Right, or you'll have to remove them and then you won't be able to put them back in again.
But then there's the super weird stuff. Like
Fleet Commander?
Fleet Commander, is that the resource where it adds another captain?
Yes.
Okay, that one's really hard. Initially I thought I can use the same sort of programming that I used with the Romulan prototype ship, the drone ship that has the Garab captain that allows you another captain. But in trying to make that work, I broke a whole bunch of other stuff, and so I don't know what I'm doing with that. So that one doesn't work. And it probably won't work with the next app update because I haven't figured out how to make it work.
Right, and then on top of that, we have the option of whether or not you choose to add a hull or a shield point, and how that can modify the ship for validity with other upgrades and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just further complication.
So some of those things, people may not realize how complicated it is from a technological standpoint, but some of them, it takes me a long time to figure out how to do it and how to make it work consistently.
Yeah, you and I have had many conversations about ideas, like theoretically how to make things make sense. And things that might make sense to me, from my point of view, even though I have a limited coding background, just don't translate into the basic language and function of how the app is laid out. So just because something sounds logical to you, our listeners, doesn't mean it's something that can be done in that way in the app, right?
Yeah, and another thing is something that you might think is really easy and I could just do really quick. It's not.
Inordinately long time.
Yeah, or it could be super complicated, or it could just be something that if I did this one little thing that seems negligible, it just breaks everything else and a bunch of stuff just stops working right.
And if I'm not mistaken, the user interface, the layout and everything was done by the previous coders, correct?
Yes.
So modifying the current interface, whether it's on the Mac, the Android, or the Apple, and even for Android and Apple on that side, it could be like tablet or phone, changing that, there's so many different other things to consider to make sure that they all work, that it's not something simple to just tweak.
Yeah.
One commonly requested feature that I hear from people is, it would be nice to have the maneuver dial information on the other screen, so you can see it all together on the ship instead of having to click through and all that, but that means rewriting the whole interface.
On which one?
Well, like if you look at on a tablet...
Are we talking Android
you
or...
Android and Apple. Yeah, you're right. I don't have my Android tablet.
See, that's the thing. It's different.
Exactly. They're completely different apps. They're able to use the same database with the same coded information, correct? But the shell that reads that information is different.
Yeah, and even though they use the same database, sometimes I can add the functionality for a card to one, but I haven't quite figured out how to add it to the other.
Right.
And so that creates some of the inconsistencies that people may have seen. I have seen some people comment, well, the iPhone app could do this. Why can't the Android app do it like that? Or the Android app can do this and the iPhone app is not doing that. And frankly, the answer is because they don't. Because they're different. Sometimes it didn't work out to work that way, or it's something that was already in place and I haven't really found a way that I could easily make it work the other way or something like that.
For some of our listeners that might be aware of how you can get unified apps across with like HTML5, this is not the case. It's not like using almost like a browser style interface to just run the exact same thing across platform. These are separately coded engines that just happen to be able to use the same database because of work that you've done.
And the other people.
Of course. But you've done the more recent fine-tuning of it.
Yeah.
They laid the groundwork. Now, if you could change anything about the way Spacedock works, like the code, the implementation, the user interface, what would you change? We're talking Dreamland here. So.
I don't know if I want to answer that, because then people will want me to do it.
Well, not necessarily from a user point of view, from your point of view then.
I honestly don't know.
Like, what's the biggest hurdle for you in maintaining this with updating both like data, the coding, and that sort of thing?
Well, the biggest hurdle is WizKids keeps coming out with cards that do things with the sole purpose of making my life difficult. I'm convinced that some of the cards they come out with are just to see how long it takes me to figure out how to make it work.
They're challenging you, that's for sure. Keeping you on your toes.
I have to say, whenever there's a preview, I have to hold my breath when I first start reading it to see if they add some new card that's going to just be an immense pain.
Yeah, and I definitely find that other than the occasional card, the resources seem to be the ones that have been tripping us up.
Lately, it's strange because they went through a whole phase where every single resource did nothing in terms of building your squad.
Yeah, like card implementation and interactions. Yeah.
Or the ones that give you like 5 tokens on this card to do various things during the game. That has no effect on the app.
Right.
So that one goes in there and you choose that resource from the resource list and it adds the cost, but I don't have to do anything to make it work.
Yeah,
but then
it's basically there as a reference.
Yeah, and then they add things like Fleet Commander, or what's the other one they added recently?
Senior staff.
Senior staff, that's what it is.
Yeah. Adding elite talents to up to all your crew.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, in theory, it might sound like an easy thing to do. It's like, oh, well, we've already got, like, say, Elam Garrick, who has an elite talent on him. Or, oh, you've got the officer cards where the first officer adds one. But putting it in such a fashion where it adds to one or more, and it's not a set value, that adds yet another layer of complexity.
Then there's the added complexity of the cost. When they have a variable cost like that, it gets tricky. Because then I have to look at not just adding slots for you to put things in. I also have to look at, well, when those slots are filled, how does that change things? And so that's where things like that get tricky.
Yeah, it's kind of like a domino effect where you push one thing over and it might knock 2 things down, and then those 2 things might each knock 3 more things down, and then that leads to what you're saying before on some minor little change might break the whole app.
Yeah. And that's happened. Some people may have lost their entire set of squads because of some bug that was not caught in testing, where something was changed that only required a certain set of circumstances to cause a problem that wasn't found, and it messed everything up.
Yeah, I remember about a year or so ago we had an issue where people were losing their squads left, right, and center after an update. And that actually prompted me to create the backup tutorial, which is something that I will share with this interview once I get it ready and uploaded for the public. That way everybody has the means to do so.
Yeah, it turned out that that was a result of the new squadrons, which was a different kind of ship that didn't have a captain.
Right.
And it all stemmed from not having a captain. It was trying to check to see if the captain had any kind of restrictions to perform or check or penalties or bonuses or whatever. But it just failed miserably when it encountered a ship that didn't have a captain.
Like the M5 computer from Daystrom. Does not compute. We're not talking like arcs of blue lightning or anything, but complete and utter failure. Yeah, and it really is a delicate balance, and that's one of the reasons why it takes so much time to put out the next updates.
Yeah.
There are times where we'll get a data update within a matter of days. We get all the information, it's loaded in, but then we're wondering, why doesn't Captain X add a crew slot? And that just goes back to what we were saying before, where the data update adds the information in for reference and everything, but the app update is what adds all the functionality. And if the functionality already exists in the exact same fashion, then it's a matter of just flipping a switch in the data to say, use that code to make this happen. But if it's something new or slightly different, that's where you have to wait for the app update in order to get the functionality.
Yeah. And sometimes it may seem like it's the same, as something else, but it's just different enough that it just doesn't work.
Exactly. Like, it's not like changing Federation to Zindi for the sake of, like, Zindi Captain, Klingon Captain.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, all those should be in there now.
Agreed, but I'm saying that would be something that would be, if they just added the same function to say Q all of a sudden had ships and stuff like that. Not saying there's going to be, but then they have, must be on a Q ship with a Q captain. The coding exists for that, like, for example, in the Klingon side of things, so you could just change the faction variable and then it should function. But if you added, like, a third variable that had never been done before, with no precedent, you'd have to rewrite that code and then introduce that in a future app update.
Yeah. But the cool thing is, sometimes I miss things. Sometimes something's supposed to add a slot, or captain shouldn't be allowed on a certain ship or something, and I missed it. And so it's not working right. But once it's brought to my attention, I can correct the data, and then there's an update that instantly makes it work.
Right.
And that's happened.
Whether you're on, like, iOS or Android, you just pull down the screen to refresh, or you do the 3 dots to check for the update. Or with Mac, I'm not familiar, I'm sure there's just an option to just check for update.
Yeah, it's in the file menu, I think.
So it's quite handy when it's something that simple. And that's where it puts some of the onus on me and the rest of you out there who use the app. If you see something, either bring it to my attention, or Robert's, or if you use GitHub, there's an issues section, under Spacedock app and then issues, where you can report things that you found. And if you do that yourself and you get that in there, it's a way to track these things, so it's easier for Robert to, look at it, evaluate whether it's something that can be done, should be done, and then implement it at an appropriate time. And I'll be providing those links as well to make it easier for your listeners.
You can also email support@spacedockapp.org. I'll usually get back to you within a reasonable time frame.
Real life permitting.
Yeah.
So, for just, say, a data update, what would you say is the average turnaround time from when something's released, assuming that there's no coding necessary for changing how it goes?
Let's forget the fact that life gets in the way. And if I know that something was released, that's the other tricky thing, is sometimes I don't know. I don't see it on Facebook, or I don't see it on Board Game Geek. I just missed it for some reason.
Right.
But if I know it's happening and I have the time to do it, I usually can do it within a few hours of when I find out about it. It takes me about an hour or so to parse through everything and get everything in there. But the key delay in all of that, honestly, is just me having to find the time to sit down and do it.
Yeah. Another question. A number of people have offered from time to time to make donations and things like that, and wanted to give you the opportunity to give your response to that publicly.
Spacedock is and always will be free. I don't take any donations for the work I do for it. I didn't create the app, I just update it. So, there you go.
There you have it. Do you have anything on the horizon for Spacedock? Like, what are you working on now, and what would you be working on in the next number of months, time permitting?
Well, right now, as we discussed, those 2 resources are my current battles that I'm trying to figure out how to get them working properly. There is an update pending that should be coming soon. I don't like to give more precise deadlines just because sometimes things come up and they get delayed, or sometimes a bug gets discovered when we're testing it that takes longer to fix.
Sounds a little like Star Trek Discovery in that regard.
Yes.
Better to release it when it's ready than to keep promising.
Except you can use the app on the device that you have instead of, unless you're in the wrong country. No, there's an app update that I'm working on that's almost done. It's just got some fine tuning. It will not have those two resources functioning properly unless I have a genius moment.
Eureka!
But they're a bit more complicated than they sound, and so they've been causing a bit more of a delay. Mm-hmm. In terms of long term, I really would like to get all of the missions in there, in the reference section. The missions that come with the different ships. Mm-hmm. Because why not? It's a reference section.
Absolutely. And I did create a spreadsheet with the information. I got halfway done, and then one of my local players, Norm Olding, finished off that list for me. So that's certainly something I can make available to you, and if there's any information that you would like that's not in there, we can get on that and get that going for a future update.
That would be great.
We'll talk more about that out of chat, but that's fantastic, because that's a resource that would be amazing. Like if you go to an event and let's say not enough people show up for an OP and you don't really want to run the OP yet, then you can go, okay, well, let's just run some scenarios, and you don't have to kind of come up with something off the cuff out of nowhere. You can just call up your Spacedock app, flip through, and ideally you select number of players you have available. Say, so you want scenarios compatible with 3 players, let's say, and then you go to town on that. What sort of functionality like that do you think you'd be able to introduce for searching through the missions?
Well, I hadn't really thought about that. I just thought about just sticking them all in the reference section just for you to scroll through. But I can certainly look into maybe figuring out a way to give some kind of searching or filtering of that.
Maybe choose some key attributes. Like
something people may not realize is I don't have an Android device at all. So even though I can do I do a lot of the updates for the Android app, I am not really that familiar with actually using it. So I may not be aware of certain limitations of that app. One thing that I think I've been told is it doesn't have a search function. Or the search is limited. I've heard that there have been requests for searching. Is that right? Is that not?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to answer that because I don't have those devices with me. I kind of take those things for granted. My nearest Android is about 12 feet away. I'm having a hard time moving about lately since I pulled some muscles in my back.
I may be misremembering that as well. But search functionality, I know, is something that needs to be improved. I know that at least on iOS, you can only search by the name of the card, which isn't entirely helpful. Sometimes you might want to search for the content. Maybe you don't even know what the card is called, but you kind of know what it's supposed to do, or you're looking for something that does something that you think it should do. And so expanding search is also something that I would like to add to both apps.
Excellent. Yeah, that's definitely something that would be useful. Like if you're trying to build a theme deck or something like that, and you want to do something that repairs hull, you'd be able to find all the cards that can repair. Or if you want the ones that can add shields. So you want to build your very first Equinaut build, but you don't know how just yet. Things like that.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions that you've received over the past year and change that you think would be worth mentioning tonight?
One thing that comes up frequently, well, not frequently, occasionally, is requests for a Windows or Windows Phone app. Mm-hmm. And I give people the same response. I have no plans to do it. The source is all available on GitHub. If you want to fork it and create a Windows version, you're more than welcome to. I do not develop on Windows devices at all, so I don't really have the resources nor the time to add another platform.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know, because the main platforms, of course, for the mobile are the Android, Apple, and Windows, and for a computer we have the PC and the Mac, and we have 3 of those 5 covered, but again, yeah, the Microsoft-oriented ones, we would need another developer to step in and add their skills to the mix in order to develop such a thing.
I also heard that I think the Windows Phone is sort of dying, so it may be sort of a futile effort.
Yeah, the direction that I would suggest if we had somebody else interested would probably be to see if there's a way to do an HTML5 oriented app that could be more multi-platform, like I mentioned earlier. Something to bring it all together, maybe make it a little more uniform, but that's off in the distance, and we'd have to wait and see if we have anybody coming out of the woodwork for that.
I would also like to add an errata line to any cards that had been errated.
Right, so you could have like both versions, you mean?
No,
Or just that it has been, and when?
I don't know what that list is right now. There's, for example, the first one they errated, it was the weapons computer thing. It wasn't unique, and then they said, oh, it's actually unique.
Oh, right, the tactical station.
Tactical station, that's it.
Right.
Like that one, on the ability section of the card, where it describes what it does, I would just add a line to the bottom, right below the whole full text, another line that says errata, this card is unique. Even though the app has it recorded as a unique card, so it functions properly, it might be helpful to see, the reason why it's different in the app.
Right.
In this case, is because it's been errated. Or
yeah, so if someone compares to their actual physical card, they go, well, why isn't it like that? I get you.
Or some of the cards, I can't remember any examples off the top of my head, but there are some things where they actually change the text. Not sometimes it's significant, sometimes it might be insignificant, but it's useful to have, just a line there telling you the reason this is different is because of this.
Right. Now, I'm not sure how much of this would be like a user interface redesign or whatever, but like when you have sets and you go to like a ship, this is like from the iOS point of view at the moment. You're looking at, say, you got the Defiant here, and then it lists off all the upgrades and captains, admirals, and so on, and then it's got you got to tap ships below to actually look at the ships. Now, would it be possible to have that same functionality on a card with errata, where the errated version, the one that the app uses for making sure everything's legit, like the unique on the tactical station, could you have like a button below it where for like original version that you could tap and you could see the old version?
Not really.
No, that'd be too complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like that may seem like something that's very simple, considering that there's so-called precedent for it within the app, that it's not that simple because it's actually a different section entirely.
Well, there's also what you're looking at is functions completely differently than what you're describing. That button there that shows you the ships instead of the upgrades, or whatever. All that is doing is loading a different list that's tied to that set. Whereas what you're talking about would actually be including more information in a way that's hidden away, that sort of only shows up when you want to show it. It's just it's a more difficult way to handle extra information.
Because not every card would have an alternate version or anything to look at. You'd have to determine, oh, well, when does this button show up, for one, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it. And you'd have to create a new card entry for each one of those and have it only show up when you're going to look at it. Otherwise, it'd be a problem for when you're building, because then you'd have two different versions.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure some people would desire. It's like, well, can I choose whether or not to use the pre-ruling version or the post-ruling version? Because that's one of the fractured things about our community, is that everybody has their own rules. Everybody plays things differently. Do we do retirement? Yeah. Do we not do retirement? Right?
Well, and that's why some of the things I sort of I'm reluctant to implement. Mm-hmm. If I feel that they're too restrictive. Some things are also like, if this is an official rule, then we should go with that as opposed to what unofficially people want to use, because an official rule is more likely to be universally accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your store may have, your unofficial rules that you go by, or you ignore certain official rules or whatever. But if I make a build that's legal there, and then I go to play with another group, and they're like, dude, that's totally illegal. That they said you can't do that. You may not even realize that. And so that's one of the things I sort of have to toe the line on as well.
Exactly. How far is too far, and how far is not far enough? I know I believe it's just with the Android version where you can actually see the resources are marked as retired or not.
No, that's on iOS as well.
Oh, I was looking at it on the iPad and I didn't see that.
It's a setting.
Okay.
You have to go into the settings app on your iOS device and go down to Spacedock, and there are some options there.
Right. I was thinking more the visual tagging of it. Like on the Android, it just shows it as, you can still use them, but it has in red retired on the ones that are.
Yeah, the iOS does the same thing.
Interesting, because I thought I'd already.
If you go into the settings app and find Spacedock, there's the option to mark retired resources.
Okay. It must have maybe either reset or something. Right, because those are just highlights. They don't actually change the functionality. It just notifies you when you're crossing thresholds. And
those dates are based on when it was officially released, or the closest I can get to finding an accurate release date. So they may not be correct for your environment. Your store may have gotten that set a month later or 2 months later.
Mm-hmm.
So your timeline might be off, but for something like that, it's best to go with the oldest possible date, because if you're going to want to play in any kind of official event, you want to be more restrictive for that kind of thing, so you don't use something that you don't plan on using, a resource that you're not even allowed to use, because it can also ruin your entire build
without knowing to take a chance. And when in doubt, the end authority would of course be WizKids. So on their site they post the FAQ. The tournament FAQ has the list of retirement resources, so you'll actually see when it was introduced from their point of view, and that information sometimes conflicts with ours. So when they say it was released in June of 2015, we might have gotten it in May or July. But the ultimate authority is what is posted on the website. And although I should say that your TO has final say, but the ultimate official authority is WizKids. So when in doubt, ask your TO beforehand. As I'm the TO for my local area, I frequently have my players messaging me and asking me, is this okay? How are we doing things with this? And one thing I'd definitely say is having a resource like Spacedock makes it so much easier for us to get to those points quicker because we notice those details where we might not realize that just filling out the fleet sheet at home.
It is kind of funny. I have played in events where people didn't know who I was. And I heard people actually use Spacedock to justify their builds. And it was a definitive source. Like, it supported their argument against, and they're like, oh, okay, so apparently I'm also an unofficial TO in a lot of circumstances.
Right.
And so there's also that. I try to be as accurate as I can for this kind of stuff, but sometimes they're also incredibly vague about their intent.
Yeah, especially when they use completely different wording between cards that do the exact same thing. They might say it 3 different ways, and the result is supposedly the same, but could be interpreted slightly differently as far as how it might interact with other cards and things like that.
Sometimes they use words that supposedly mean not what those words mean.
Yeah, and that's where we've had some pretty interesting errata pop up from time to time. Say, oh no, this is actually what we meant. And some of us even scratch our heads to say, is that what they meant, or is that just how they're doing things now?
Yeah.
All right. I think we're starting to slowly drift onto other tangents, but I think we've covered that subject very well. Thank you very much, Robert, for all that you've done with the Spacedock app and all that you'll continue to do. We're all definitely grateful.
Well, I'm glad that it's still a good resource, and that there are other ones out there too that are also good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not just tooting our own horn here. There are a couple other options. I'm personally aware of Utopia. It's a browser-based one, so that's the main way for Windows users to have access to that. And I believe there's one other that I can't recall off the top of my head.
I am only aware of Utopia.
Right.
But
yeah.
I really like it. I think it's a really nice interface.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's different and unique is fantastic. And the fact that these are free apps, both Spacedock and Utopia, and that is, the more competition, the more ideas get generated, and the better the community becomes for it. So there's no fierce competition or animosity or anything. It's just a matter of sharing and helping the community build and grow.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for your time, Robert. We'll be speaking with you again soon.
Well, thanks for having me.
Warp Core Breach is produced by Nick Norris and David Montgomery, with additional content from our contributors. Our computer is voiced by Corinne Donnelly.
Warp Core Breach is not endorsed, sponsored, or affiliated with CBS Studios Incorporated or the Star Trek franchise. All Star Trek trademarks and logos are owned by CBS Studios Incorporated.
All sound files are used under Creative Commons 3.0 by attribution. For specifics, please visit our Facebook page by searching Warp Core Breach Podcast. If you want to contribute to the show, let us know on the Facebook page, or you can email us at warpcorebreachpodcast@gmail.com.